Hello and welcome to the CFB SuperShow. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85. And tonight we are breaking down another conference, giving you a preview of the CUSA. Yes, that's right, the Conference USA. All 10 teams coming at you. We're going to talk about last year, this year, their head coach, and viable quarterback, running back, wide receivers, DFS, and betting purposes. Last week, we covered the Sun Belt, broke it down in full. Feeling pretty good as we go through here. There is some late news that's happening, some changes, deep into May, even there were still transfers happening on the college football side. We're going to go over all of them so that when the season starts, you are fully versed in the CUSA and ready to go. Again, 10 teams in the CUSA. They're adding Kennesaw State, the Owls. They are adding, welcome to the FBS, right? They are going to be the new kid on the block, the only team in all of college football making the jump up. And traditionally, we see teams who dominate at the FCS, UMass, and a couple of others, they tend to struggle a little bit when they move up. And I think that's going to be the case with Kennesaw State. We're going to go right into this preview and talk about the Kennesaw State Owls right now. They are coached by Brian Bohannon. 3-6 last year. It's going to be a big, steep learning curve. At quarterback, they're fairly green. Davis Bryson, who made 4 appearances last year in line to be the quarterback, attempted just 11 passes in those 4 appearances, so not a lot of experience there. Where he was great was on the ground as a dual threat, rushed for over 200 yards in those 4 games. That was with 1 start, by the way, an 8.6 YPC. Those of you who have followed me over the years know I'm a big YPC fan. When I see a number like that, I get a little bit excited, right? So Davis Bryson, the name to know there for Kennesaw State. At running back, their top returner in the name to know, Michael Benefield. Rushed for 546 yards, 6 touchdowns, and a YPC of 6.3. Not as impressive as his quarterback, or what I believe to be his quarterback, Davis Bryson's, but still strong nonetheless. I really think we see Bryson end up doing a lot of running here. I don't foresee this group being a prolific passing team, at least right away. And that's going to definitely cut in and hurt Benefield. He'll get carries, but I think he's going to cede a lot of work to Bryson there. The most intriguing option, and possibly even the top playmaker, like I said, I expect the Kennesaw State Owls to be like the worst team in the conference or near the bottom, but they have a name you want to get familiar with right now and into the season as we get there. Week 0 is right around the corner, folks. Gabriel Benyard. Across the past 2 seasons with the Owls, 27 catches, 567 yards, and 6 touchdowns. He also rushed for 318 yards on 48 carries. But that's not all. 21.7 yards per punt return. Yes, he is a punt returner, and also returns kicks where he averaged 25.8 yards per kick return. That is an intriguing playmaker and somebody who is going to have the ball a lot. We'll see. I foresee, Kennesaw State guys being extremely cheap right away. They are not going to be well known by the masses. Benyard's a type of guy coming into the season. We can expect him to be near min price. A sneaky look there whenever Kennesaw State is on the slate. Probably won't be much, but when they are, I do like Benyard. Again, Gabriel Benyard. That is the name to know there for the Owls. Moving right along here, and we're going in order of what I project to be, or what I think to be, and this is by odds too, top teams down to lower. We're going to start with the lower teams, or what I suspect will win the least amount of games. So that's why we started with Kennesaw. Going up to the UTEP Miners. They will be coached this year by Scotty Walden. This is his first year as the Miners coach, coming over from Austin Peay. And what he has done, Austin Peay, we had them on the slate a couple of times, right, over the last couple of years. You're familiar with them. They were a very fun team. They were good. They were actually pretty good, played WKU and other teams fairly competitively. Bringing a lot of his pieces with him from Austin Peay to be expected. So we'll see how that works. I do think UTEP will be competitive. As far as winning games, that might be another story, but I do like Scotty Walden quite a bit. I think he'll eventually get this program near the top of the CUSA, honestly. Quarterback, we're talking about Cade McConnell. He took over as starter right around mid-season. Longtime starter Gavin Hardison. Hardison had amazing weapons year in and year out, just couldn't do a lot with them. Dealt with some serious injuries, ended up missing out over half the season. McConnell stepped in, threw for over 1,400 yards and 6 touchdowns. I would suspect he comes in and takes the QB1 job here, as he had it for most of last season. At running back, we had the first Austin Peay transfer, Javon Jackson. 1,400 yards on the ground and 10 touchdowns. Hello, RB1, bell cow. Yes, yes, and yes, Javon Jackson is going to be awesome. At wide receiver, a couple of Austin Peay transfers. Again, my man Scotty Walden, he brought this team with him. Trey Goodman, 34 catches, 721 yards, and 7 touchdowns a season ago. Cam Thomas, another Austin Peay transfer, 50 catches, 629 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Also grabbing Eastern Kentucky transfer receiver Jaden Smith. He had 73 catches, 800 yards, and 5 touchdowns a season ago. So 3 different receivers, all over 600 yards last year. Definitely an intriguing looking offense here for UTEP. I'm not super excited about Cade McConnell, but he's adequate. And Javon Jackson, who is going to run all over the place. This offense definitely has some potent options for us on the DFS standpoint of things. Moving on to the FIU Panthers. Mike McIntyre's back again, a 4-8 season at quarterback. We have my guy, Key Jenkins. Now, you remember last year when FIU started out, Jenkins coming in as a true freshman. He was my guy. I had mentioned, like, hey, he probably isn't going to win the job, but he is somebody who I feel like is going to, 3 or 4 games in, take over the gig. In fact, it only took 1 game for that to happen. I'm a really big fan of his. When you look at his overall stats, he's not exactly amazing in that standpoint, but definitely looking at a breakout season here in year 2. Threw for 2,400 yards, 11 touchdowns, was picked off 11 times, 6 rushing touchdowns. Not a ton in the rushing yard department, did take some sacks. But again, I'm expecting a really big leap here in year 2. And I think that, he will be less likely to when a play breaks down to kind of panic, have a little bit more strength. He has the weapons at his disposal. Even though they're losing some important pieces, he won't have Grayson James breathing down his neck. That's who he usurped after week 1 last year. James is off to Boston College. They do lose their top receiver, Chris Mitchell, who is off to Notre Dame, 1,000-yard receiver, but there are still some options here in the FIU offense that can do work. Dean Patterson, 28 catches, 423 yards and a touchdown, and Eric Rivers, 32 catches, 370 yards and 2 touchdowns. Both are back. That'll be where his flagship looks are, and his continuity with them will be great. At running back, they do return their 1-2 punch of Shamari Lawrence and Keon Ohms. Both rushed for over 450 yards, combined 9 touchdowns. That is a nice group of running backs there for FIU. Key Jenkins, he's going to be a guy that people look at his stats, write him off, do not play him early on. We're going to be playing him early on, and I'm very, very confident that he puts together a very fine statistical season for us DFS-wise. The Louisiana Tech Bulldogs, they were 3-9 last year, but you know what? DFS-wise, they get it done for us under Sonny Cumbie. I think they'll win more games this season. Jack Turner does return. He threw for 1,000 yards, 5 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. He's the likely QB1. Hank Bachmeier is off to Wake Forest. Say the name Hank Bachmeier and CFB DFS players kind of collectively shudder when you hear that name. Has his moments at Boise State, had some moments at Louisiana Tech, but for the most part, Bachmeier was a hard one to get excited about. Now he'll be torturing us at Wake Forest. But Jack Turner gets the reins here, what I project to get the reins here at Louisiana Tech. The nice thing is at running back, Marquise Crosby will be back. Missed all but 1 game last season. Remember, he nearly rushed for 1,000 yards in 2022. He is going to be a stud, assuming he is fully healthy, no ill effects from his previous injuries. Crosby will be a guy who gets a high amount of volume for the Bulldogs. They also bring in a Texas State transfer. Now, Texas State in the Sun Belt, we talked about that last week, very potent offense. They put together a huge, huge amount of offensive statistics. Donario Davenport was a running back for them. He transfers over here to La Tech. 458 yards, 2 touchdowns. Also caught 11 passes for 102 yards, 2 touchdowns as a receiver. Nice little secondary piece behind Crosby there just in case they don't want to give him a full load. But Davenport is an interesting look there as what I suspect will be a near min-price option, especially early on. At wide receiver, breakout candidate True Edwards. Now, the La Tech receiving group the last couple of seasons, it's been nice. DFS-wise, betting-wise, they have been very good to us. True Edwards breakout season incoming could be for sure. True Edwards put together some really, really good games last season. Some breakouts here. We were on him kind of early. It was almost too early. Kind of dudded out in the first couple of games. Then he had a big midseason game, and now his name should definitely be on your radar. 23 catches, 284 yards, and 2 touchdowns a season ago. I like him for a WR1 ascension for La Tech. They hit the portal to fill out the rest of their receiving room. Jeremiah Ballard from UTEP, Jimmy Holiday from Western Kentucky. That'll be a familiar name to you. And Abdul Fattah Ibrahim from Bowling Green. At tight end, incumbent Nate Jones. Solid hands, not a huge amount of stats last year, but Nate Jones is a guy who can be relevant for fantasy purposes. New Mexico State, the Aggies. It's been a tough one for the Aggies. They have Tony Sanchez coming in, first-year coach, and they're going to be replacing their top 2 quarterbacks, their top 2 running backs, and 7 of their top 8 receivers. Absolutely ravaged by the transfer portal. None worse than Diego Pavia, longtime quarterback there at New Mexico State, DFS savant. He's headed to Vanderbilt during the SEC preview. We'll be talking about him, but that's a lot of production for the Aggies to have to replace. And it's an absolute mess at quarterback. It's going to be a competition, and we may not know who's going to win that competition until very, very late into the season. Or hell, we might get a situation where one quarterback starts, one plays a half. I'm really worried about the Aggies QB situation. Here's what we have. Wake Forest transfer, Santino Marucci, very little used. You're probably not even going to know that name unless you're a hardcore Wake Forest fan. Kentucky transfer and formerly an Iowa transfer, Deuce Hogan. Again, and if you're not a fan of those programs, probably don't know him either. Hardly played ever. UTEP transfer Jake McNamara, and then a handful of underclassmen that all barely played as well. Right now, I would have to guess my best informed guess would be that Deuce Hogan wins the job, but it's very much up in the air. And I can't say that any of those guys would be very confident for me. I can't imagine we're going to be using any of that group at all this season unless we're dealing with a showdown slate or, a really tight price slate. Any of those things, no thank you. Where I do get excited, and that goes for their receiver core too. Top returners, Cordell David, PJ Johnson, Donovan Falpo. Statistically speaking, none of those guys jump off the page. Cordell David does have skill, ability, upside, but I'm just not excited about the passing game whatsoever. What I am excited about is this running game. Monte Watkins. How many times did we use Monte Watkins last year on these New Mexico State slates? I mean, literally more, like no one ever really used him. Late in the season as a cheap guy, we saw some ownership, but there were 4 or 5 slates with the Aggies on them in which we were really pushing on Monte Watkins. Hyper efficient, rushed for 572 yards on only 59 carries. That's a YPC of 9.7, nearly 10 yards a carry. Me likey. Scored 2 touchdowns as well. I love Watkins. Will he hold up as a bell cow guy? Probably not. I think we'll see him get more touches. remain efficient, but he's not going to be in a situation where he takes 80 to 90% of the carries. They do bring in Buffalo transfer Mike Washington. That is a name you should know from Matchin Days. Rushed for over 1,100 yards in 3 seasons at Buffalo. Don't get excited, not in 1, in 3, but definitely a bruiser style back. Watkins, more of that, efficient, elusive type of guy. They'll make a good 1-2 punch, and I think they'll get a lot of work. Watkins also will benefit as a pass catcher, 8 receptions, 77 yards, and a touchdown a season ago. I think they're going to really feed those two the ball, and Watkins will be a guy that they get in a lot of like PPR work too. A lot of short yardage type of stuff, getting him the ball 1 to 2 yards, letting him work. So he's going to rack up a ton of PPR points. There might not be a tremendous amount of yardage there from a receiving standpoint, but I do think he ends up with a lot of games in which he catches 2, 3, 4 passes. And if we get some props there on Watkins betting his game-to-game receptions number, that could be a profitable thing for us. All right, we're going to start getting into some more exciting teams here. I promise. The Middle Tennessee Blue Raiders. Head coach, first year, Derek Mason. Not Derek Mason, the receiver, but this is the former Vanderbilt coach from 2014 to 2020. Nothing really too exciting about Derek Mason, but I think he has a chance to do well here. The interesting thing is that Rick Stockstill, who has been the Blue Raiders coach since 2005, you go back, that's about 18 years, 18, 19 years. The Marvel Cinematic Universe was not a thing yet. Harry Potter was barely past like movie 4, right? It's a weird thing to think about. So Rick Stockstill at Middle Tennessee for a very long time. Derek Mason going to try and put his mark on this program after they stumbled to a 4-8 record. They're too good to be 4-8. They have too much talent. They should be a upper tier, maybe below the first 3 or 4 top teams, but they're right there and a team challenging for a bowl game. And they've got some serious talent on this squad as well. At quarterback, you're looking at the dual threat, Nicholas Vattiato. He was a very popular option on Blue Raiders slates last year, especially because he was mispriced habitually by DraftKings. 3,100 yards, 23 touchdowns, picked off 13 times, but also rushed for 400 yards and 2 scores. I like him for the 3,000 plus passing yards once again, but I do feel pretty confident, and you look at their running back room, that we could see him eclipse 500 to 600 rushing yards as well. So Vattiato is going to be a valuable DFS asset for us for sure. At running back, Frank Peasant is back. Jaden Credle, 427 yards, 2 touchdowns. Peasant, 306 yards and 4 touchdowns. Nothing too exciting there. Expect them to share the ball once again, with Vattiato stealing a lot of work, especially when they get into the red zone, or more specifically, the goal line area. At receiver, this is where it gets fun. They're bringing in some talent. Gamarian Carter, a Vanderbilt transfer. Omari Kelly, an Auburn transfer. But the cream of the crop here is Holden Willis, a true versatile weapon in the slot, though there's some talk about using him as a tight end and all over the place. 46 catches, 500 yards, 5 touchdowns a season ago. Looking up, digging deep, finding some stats here to kind of really paint a picture for you of just what to expect from Holden Willis and how good he can actually be. You look back at last year, 8 different receivers had at least 65 targets, a catch rate of at least 70%, and average roughly 15 yards per catch. A bit obscure, I know, but 8 different players having that stat line. That was a list that included the likes of Roman Wilson, Brian Thomas, both off to the NFL, Utah State efficient, hyper-productive Jalen Royals, their top receiver, and of course, budding star Holden Willis. Look out. He has a great relationship with Vattiato. They're going to force feed the ball to Willis. They're going to find ways to get him the rock. I don't know quite what to expect from Kelly and Carter just yet. Obviously, SEC pedigree there, but this is Willis. He's the star. He is their top option there, and should get a ton of targets on a game-to-game basis, and they're going to find all kinds of ways to get him the rock. So Holden Willis, stud. Expect him to be expensive very quickly, maybe not at the first week or two, but he will be a 7K receiver for most of the season. And we tend to get Middle Tennessee on a lot of slates, weekday slates, showdown slates. Willis is a guy. Get familiar with him if you did not play last year. He is a name you certainly want to know. All right, moving right along here, Sam Houston State, the Bearcats. I went to high school at a place called Monroe. We were called the Bearcats. One of the chants that people we'd play basketball games and go to wrestling tournaments, and they would chant, "What's a Bearcat?" And that was like a habitual thing that we always had to deal with, like the other team, the other team's fan base, like chanting, "What's a Bearcat?" And I'll be honest with you, I don't actually know. All the years of going there and no, I'm kidding. But the Sam Houston State Bearcats, this is a team that I'm extremely intrigued by. They've got some really talented pieces. They use the transfer portal to perfection. Casey Keeler is the head coach, 3-9 last season. They brought in some really high upside talent. It's not high floor talent, but there's berserker mode written all over this team. They do have returning quarterback Grant Gunnell, who was the backup last season behind Shoemaker, who is gone. Gunnell spent some time with Arizona. But Jace Bauer, Central Michigan transfer Jace Bauer, is a member of Sam Houston State. Now, quarterback, like passing wise, very inconsistent at the MAC level, but he put together some seriously slate breaking games as a member of the Central Michigan Chippewas. Passed for about 2,300 yards and 13 touchdowns across 2 years. But he rushed for nearly 700 yards and 14 touchdowns. And a lot of his value, in fact, most of his value on a game-to-game basis came from his rushing ability. There would be times where Central Michigan would play 2, maybe even 3 quarterbacks in a game. Made it extremely difficult to play any of them. But Bauer would still put up 30-plus fantasy points in some of these games because he just was an absolute ridiculous dual threat option. Pulling up a couple of his game logs here from the past couple of years, just so you can see what we're talking about here. All right. So here's some of his highlights. And it was so random because he'd come in and get like a carry here, 2 carries here. He had one of his best games in 2022 against Bowling Green. Threw for 185 yards and a touchdown. Okay, but rushed for 109 yards. He followed that up the very next week against Northern Illinois. Only 36 yards passing, but he rushed for another 109 yards and 2 touchdowns, and they did win that game, affecting the game with his legs. Then you go into last year, and there were injuries, and again, they were playing multiple quarterbacks, which made it very tough. But he had a game where he rushed against Northern Illinois on Halloween, actually, 20 carries, 106 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Perhaps the most memorable was in, September 23rd against South Alabama. 55 rushing yards, but 4 rushing touchdowns. 14 on the ground a season ago. 10 a season ago, 4 in his freshman season. But just a very versatile runner. I foresee them maybe employing some kind of similar system there where we see Grant Gunnell kind of handle a lot of the heavy lifting maybe early on, but Bauer just being one of those weapons. So it's going to make it hard to use him, because who's going to burn a quarterback spot or super flex on a guy who may or may not play very much, but he does have slate breaking upside. If we're talking MME, multiple lineups, he's the type of guy that you throw into 1 or 2 lineups for a lotto ticket because he can win you a GPP in a hurry. At running back, they have John Gentry back. He's their top incumbent, rushed for 392 yards. Also, 35 receptions, 261 yards, and 2 touchdowns as a receiver. So Gentry has value. But the big name they're bringing in there through the portal, Jay Ducker, Spent his freshman season at NIU, where he rushed for 1,100 yards. Spent the last 2 at Memphis, highly productive in year 1. Then last year only played 4 or 5 games. Didn't really stay healthy. Wasn't in the system. Kind of got phased out. Now he takes his talents to Sam Houston State, where I suspect he's going to get an absolute lot of work. Will he rush for 1,000 yards like he did at NIU in year 1? Maybe not, because Gentry is still a thing, still exists, has to get touches as well. But I do think you're talking about a guy who has a career resurgence, rushes for somewhere between 500 and 700 yards, and a combo of 5 to 6 touchdowns. So a highly productive type of guy, and somebody who's going to be underpriced early on as well, as we kind of shake out here and start to get our depth charts in order and practices and everything. At wide receiver, their top option is back, Noah Smith. Whenever Sam Houston State was on the slate, we played Noah Smith. PPR-wise, he was the guy, and he was never priced above 6K, or if he was, it was very rare. 79 catches, 782 yards, and 6 touchdowns. WR1 all the way. Malik Phillips is also back. 35 catches, 430 yards, and a touchdown. And they also returned their WR4 and 5 in Ife Adehi and Simeon Evans. So a lot of continuity there at the receiver room. We'll see how quarterback shakes out, but I'm very excited about Jay Ducker, Noah Smith, and the prospect of Jace Bauer. This team's definitely got fantasy viability written all over it. All right, next up, we're going to talk about the Jacksonville State Gamecocks. This is Rich Rodriguez. Now, Jacksonville State, they went 9-4, and it was the 3rd best FBS debut since 2008. So real deal there under Rich Rod. Say what you will about him. He has been successful pretty much everywhere he's coached except for Michigan. A bit of a lame duck couple of years there, but everywhere else he has won. And this Jacksonville State team, I don't think they're going to have any real significant drop off. 9-4 is in this conference, that's maybe a hard thing to repeat, all things considering. But I do foresee 8+ wins for them once again. Quarterback Logan Smothers does return. I'm okay. I'm lukewarm on him, but they do bring in some transfers to push him. Furman transfer Tyler Huff, and UConn transfer Zion Turner. Zion Turner is a high upside option. We'll see if he's able to push his way to the top of the depth chart before the beginning of the season. At running back, they do have Anwar Lewis. He rushed for 450 yards last year. And Ron Wiggins, 468 yards. Those are their top 2 returners at the position, but they didn't sit around. They hit the portal hard at that position as well. Georgia transfer Andrew Paul, high pedigree. Hello. He did not play a whole lot. Very raw as a prospect, but you're talking about SEC pedigree. Coming to Jacksonville State, you think that Rich Rod will find a way to use him? Absolutely. And Michael Dukes, who I believe is going into year 6, played a couple of seasons with Clemson, USF. Throughout the course of his career, he has racked up over 1,000 yards. Definitely a depth piece here for the Gamecocks, but their running back room has some real talent. Might be one of the better running back rooms in the entire CUSA when you look at, 1 through 4. Maybe individually some better players like Cooley, who we're going to talk about for Liberty, but overall this group has a lot of intrigue, and I'm very, very interested to see how Andrew Paul is deployed immediately with that talent. Might take some time for him, but he's going to probably have a really long leash, and I think Rich Rodriguez is the perfect coach for him. At wide receiver, again, they hit the transfer portal there as well. Flip Randolph, the transfer from UAB, and Brandon Spector, transfer from Clemson. So a lot of new faces here for Jacksonville State. They were certainly kind of like New Mexico State, pillaged by the portal. They do return their top tight end, Sean Brown, 19 receptions, 300 yards, 5 touchdowns. So they do have him back. But overall, this is a nice-looking team in Jacksonville State, and I think that they'll win some games ugly. They'll be maybe involved in some lower-scoring affairs, but I do think there's fantasy viability on this roster at the end of the day. Again, the most intriguing thing to follow is that running back room, and if Andrew Paul can break out there sooner rather than later. All right, moving on to the Hilltoppers of Western Kentucky. Tyson Helton is the coach there. 8-5 last year, respectable. Quarterbacks wise, they've gone through some changes. Austin Reed the last 2 years, there was there wasn't a really big drop off from our man Bailey Zappi to Austin Reed. Wasn't much of a running option, but he made the throws and he was very confident when doing so. But he is out of eligibility, so they have to turn to perhaps sophomore Caden Veldkamp. That name, if it rings a bell, it should. He threw for 383 yards and 5 touchdowns in that bowl game against Old Dominion last year. So he'll be coming into the mix, but they also went out and got a transfer from Texas State, that prolific Texas State offense that we talk about so much the last couple of weeks, TJ Finley. Now, Texas State, McLeod, he's in the mix there. We talked about it last week. Finley didn't like those guys coming in. He decided to leave. He goes into a situation where, hey, Western Kentucky doesn't have Zach Kitley in that offense, but they're still going to throw the football plenty. You got Finley coming in as a guy who, threw for over 3,300 yards last year, 24 touchdowns, only 8 interceptions, and he has a little bit of dual threat upside. There's an element to his game and using his legs, which will be important for Western Kentucky, as they haven't really had that with the quarterback over the last couple of seasons. So a nice little, battle there between Veldkamp and Finley. I do like Finley to come out of there, but Veldkamp is certainly not going to be a guy who, if he does start out as QB2, it may not be very long. So we'll see what happens there. But a good problem to have for Western Kentucky. At running back, you have Elijah Young. He's the top returner, 474 yards, 3 touchdowns, also 20 catches, 250 yards, and 3 touchdowns as a receiver. At the wideout position, Dalvin Smith, he is the name to know. He was a star as well. It was Veldkamp and Dalvin Smith in the bowl game against ODU. Dalvin Smith, 9 catches, 77 yards, and 3 touchdowns in that bowl game. For the season, 50 receptions, 513 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Again, Dalvin Smith, I expect him to be the top wideout on this team. Michael Matheson returns after a season-long injury. Slot short yardage guy, and Easton Messer also back, 42 catches, 480 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Transfer of note, Alabama State transfer Keyshawn Johnson, who they like and will be in the mix as well. And that takes us to the number 1 team in the CUSA, the Liberty Flames, coached by Jamie Chadwell. They were 13-1 last year. Chadwell has had a top 30 offense in 3 of his last 4 seasons. That dates back with the few years that he dominated with Coastal Carolina. This is now going to be year 2 with Liberty. A lot of people had a bad taste in their mouth with Liberty. They got a terrible matchup in the bowl game. They got absolutely dismantled by Oregon. Offensively, they were fine, but the problem with Liberty is their defense was putrid and they got exposed. And their defense isn't going to be much better this year, but lucky for them, they don't play in the SEC. They don't play in the Big 12. They play in the CUSA. So their defense won't get as exposed against some of these teams that we've just been talking about like they would in another conference. They're going to be really good on offense once again. After flirting with the transfer portal, they get Caden Salter back. Now, Salter would have had his choice, right? NIL would have been there for him. There were some big name programs that were going to be interested, but he does go back to Liberty. Respect for that, where he's going to have a chance to absolutely dominate. 2,900 yards passing last year, 32 touchdowns to just 6 interceptions. He also rushed for 1,100 yards and 12 touchdowns. Top dual threat in the conference, perhaps even one of the top dual threats at the collegiate level. Now, when you look at total QBR, he was the top QB in that category at the G5 level by a wide margin. He was also, you kind of take it back and include some of the P5 teams. He was ahead of Jalen Milroe, Drake May, Jordan Travis, and Caleb Williams in total QBR. So you're talking about a guy who is not a overachiever by any means. He is a big time star and probably an NFL QB. We'll see what happens here with Liberty if they can rattle off the success they just had last year, but they have an absolute massive amount of talent on offense. And again, that defense isn't going to be anything special, but their offense is going to score a lot of points. Along with Salter, they return Quentin Cooley, their top running back, ran for 1,400 yards last year, 16 touchdowns, a YPC, a healthy YPC, mind you, of 6.3. Love it. Cooley and Salter, those are two guys you can pencil in for a combined 2,500 rushing yards. Those are guys that are honestly and obviously going to be big-time fantasy producers in all formats. At wide receiver, it'll look maybe a little different. They do return Treon Sibley. He's their top returner, 23 catches, 467 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And then they bring in a trio of transfers. Tyson Mobley, a Coastal Carolina transfer. Chad will be familiar with him. Julian Gray, an NC State transfer, and then Donta Lee, who is a transfer from Shaw and an absolute stud kick returner. We'll see. The fact that they have such an elite dual threat and ground game at Liberty will help lessen the blow, but CJ Daniels, who's a 1,000-yard receiver for them last year, he's transferred to LSU. He's going to be the next in line of like great LSU receivers. He's going to be huge, and we'll talk about him at length and when we do the SEC preview in a couple of weeks. But that's a tough loss. They don't, of those transfers they bring in, there's no CJ Daniels. But again, they have such an elite ground game and dual threat quarterback. And I think Treon Sibley, slot guy, he can make some big plays. I do think you see him kind of step up and absorb a lot of those yards. Maybe doesn't hit the 1,000-yard mark, but he's going to definitely flirt with that number. Treon Sibley is the guy to know in that receiver room. And then at tight end, Bentley Henshaw. Henshaw was a nice little value play for us at times. 18 catches, 219 yards, 6 touchdowns. Not as great on DK, but over on FanDuel and things like that, Henshaw is a nice look. Very favored red zone target by Salter. Bentley Henshaw, definitely a guy to know going into the 2024 season. So that is the CUSA. Very quick, 10 teams breaking it down. It's going to be a fun one. This conference, when you look at it, a lot of teams are ravaged by the portal. They brought in a lot of talent. When we have some of these kind of weekday or small slates that feature a game or two from the CUSA, there's going to be a lot of edge because I don't think a lot of people outside of the true psychos like us are going to follow them that much, and coverage of the CUSA doesn't tend to be that robust compared to a lot of other places. So I feel like with the preview we have here and all the stuff we're going to be talking about leading up to week 0, you guys will be well versed. You'll know what to do. You'll immediately be able to pull up, Middle Tennessee's on the slate. Let me see what's the price of Holden Willis. Oh my God, 5.2K, all in. Let me see Javon Jackson, this running back. Well, what are we going to do at quarterback with New Mexico State? Like, you're going to be able to make those decisions quicker. You're going to make them with sound advice and knowledge and info, where other people are just going to be hoping for the best and looking at last year's stats, not factoring in role, coaching philosophy, all these other variables. Very, very confident and comfortable with the CUSA and other conferences as well. As far as what we have on tap the rest of the summer, there is a lot of excitement about the WNBA right now. The betting room is popping over on FTN. TBT is less than a month away. There will be TBT coverage there, especially in the prop market. The Olympics are on the horizon. We'll have coverage there. And then your guy will be covering some preseason NFL like I did the last 2 years for FTN. Very excited about that. And then we'll be winding down the previews right around the first week of August. And then we'll be rolling up our sleeves, doing some prediction shows, awards-wise, betting opportunities, futures, things like that. And then we'll be fully invested in our week 0 preview, especially when those slate pricings drop out. and we start to get props and everything else. A lot of excitement and things planned. It's only June 19th, I know, but in the blink of an eye, you're going to be at the end of August and ready to tilt college football with us in the FTN Discord. Speaking of which, FTNfantasy.com, one price fits all. We offer it. We have every sport available when it comes to the betting markets. DFS coverage right now, our MLB team is crushing it. NBA just wrapped up, but plenty going on with WNBA, golf, every niche sport you can think of, and the pro sports, and NHL still going strong. Lots of bankroll building opportunities, and the content will not stop. Appreciate everybody who has continued to support not only me and the Super Show, but the FTN network in general, and everybody who has continued to do so. We'll be back again next week, same time, a little bit later in the evening and on demand. We'll be taking care of another conference preview, talking about the Mountain West next week. You will not want to miss that. Lots of fantasy goodness in the Mountain West. And then we'll be going through and getting into the power conferences and really delving in on the long shows there. One thing I want to mention as well, some feedback, which I know and already planned, but I'm going to be going back to not only the college football preview shows that we've done, but also transfer portal talk and all of the roster changes for CBB that we spent the last 2 months doing. We're going to put timestamps into all of those so you can go back and quickly view anything relevant that you want to check. A roster, a team, a player, and you'll find that information easy. You won't have to go through the entire show. Click, watch, and enjoy. Thanks, everybody who continues to watch in droves on Twitter, on YouTube, and on all of our social media. Take care, and we'll be back next week. Another edition of CFB Super Show. We're out of here.